Hi there, we're just going to give it a couple of moments just to let people connect this morning, wherever you are in the world, but very happy to have you all here with us today. Okay, I make it a minute past, so let's kick off. So thank you everyone for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura Wakefield. I'm the Marketing and Industry Programmes Director at IAB Europe. I'm very delighted to be hosting the session today with Adform. So this is the Industry Insider webinar with Adform. This is all part of our Trust and Transparency series, which we actually first started last September. It was really because we wanted to bring people together to discuss trust and transparency and show what our industry was doing to address some of the challenges we were faced. So we've decided to do it again this year, and we've run a number of different industry insider sessions, including the one we have here today, which is going to be rounding off the series quite nicely. So for today's session, I'm very delighted to introduce Cecilia, who's the Director Global Marcoms at Adform, and she's going to be leading a fireside chat with Adam Edelshain at PwC, and Phil Acton, who's the UK Country Manager at Adform. So Adam started PwC's media measurement team together with Sam Tomlinson in 2008, and he currently leads PwC's audience measurement and reporting team in London. He supports a variety of media owners and ad tech businesses with their multi-platform audience reporting, as well as verifying their audience data segments. He also reviews the process and controls underpinning their technology platforms, focusing on areas such as efficiency, transparency, and accuracy of reporting. His clients have included many companies, including the BBC, Channel 4, Financial Times, News UK, and the Wall Street Journal. Adam is at the forefront of PwC's continued drive to innovate around audience measurement and reporting, including exploring measures and impact and engagement. And then Phil, as I mentioned, is the Country Manager UK at Adform, where he is responsible for further expanding Adform's innovative vision of effective modern marketing through their integrated advertising platform, Adform Flow. Drawing on his expertise in strategy, sales, new business development, and account management, Phil heads up the UK team in line with Adform's Forward Together philosophy. Phil focuses on cultivating and developing new and existing client relationships, as well as building on partnerships with brands, media, and creative agencies. So today's session is live, so we are going to be recording the session, so you can go back and watch it again afterwards, but it also means that we are open to audience questions. So if you do have any questions at all for Adam or Phil as we go through the fireside chats today, do pop them in the Q&A box, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. And Cecilia will try and get to as many of them as she can towards the end of the session. With that, Cecilia, I'm going to hand over to you to take over the session.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and hello, everybody. And I wanted to specifically thank also IAB Europe for having invited us to host this webinar on trust and transparency, because really for us at Adform, transparency is at the very core of our DNA. And we actually thought we could share with you today this initiative that we kicked back in Cannes. We launched in Cannes last June with PwC. That's why we invited Adam to join us in this session today. So let's start with the first question, and this is for Phil. Phil, can you tell us a little bit, why are we here today?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I think why we're here today is because for those of you who have joined us, you care about the third-party cookie going away, even with any delays that Google have announced. So, of course, Google Chrome is what we're talking about, because the other browsers, Safari and Firefox being the main ones, have stopped using cookies as far back as 2018, 2019, following sort of GDPR. So we're essentially talking about Chrome. In terms of kind of why that's so important, even though there is a delay, I think it's important that everybody understands what alternatives there are and what they can start to do now. And Adform ourselves, we started on this journey probably about 2-3 years ago now. Our heritage is in the Nordics. We're a Danish company still. We've been around for 20 years. And in the Nordics, we started to notice that more and more people were using browsers that didn't have cookies. So Safari has a larger market share in the Nordics than some of the other countries. And as I say, they stopped using cookies back in 2018, 2019. Firefox followed suit very closely after. So as we noticed this change quite a few years ago, we started to build and rebuild functionality into our platform, Adform Flow, to be able to adapt to this change. We wanted to make sure that, you know, we could handle all the elements of successful advertising that we can do today. So frequency capping, targeting, etc. And so we really relaunched our platform a couple of years ago so that it could run on first-party IDs from publishers. I won't go into too much detail about the difference, but imagine the difference between third-party cookies and first-party IDs being the difference between a car running from petrol to hybrid or electric. So to be clear, we didn't bring our own ID out. We just designed the platform to be able to work with what IDs were coming from the publishers. The publishers loved it. You know, they could see the value. I think I always say this when I'm on webinars and events, but it's like a golden age of publishers that they understand that the information that they have is of real value now, and it's not just a race to the bottom in terms of CPMs and revenue and so on. So the first party was really important. Having the publishers on board was really important, but also then being able to expand that and not just take from publishers, but from advertisers as well. So as we tested this in the Nordics, and as we started to roll it out, not just in the Nordics, but other key markets like Germany, the UK, obviously, Spain, Italy, Central and Eastern Europe, and the US, we had a number of test cases and clients that we could use to show customers and prospects. We had agency clients, we had brand direct clients, we had upper funnel use cases, lower funnel use cases. So we were seeing really great results. We were lucky enough this year to win a couple of awards off the back of it in the UK for the drum and campaign as well. But we wanted to go further. And, you know, we had worked with Sam and Adam and the PwC team a few years ago now, when they validated some of the other elements of our platform that we wanted to have validated following the PwC ISBA transparency audit, which is amazingly nearly 3 years old now, I think. But off the back of that, we really wanted to focus our platform, as you said, Cecilia, at the start, that it was transparent, that we had things like good match rates within the DSP and the DMP, all those kind of things. So PwC did some good validation then, and I think it just made sense for us to get them involved now and validate what we're doing in the market with regards to the death of the cookie.
So, yeah, now, Adam, so what was your role, the role of PwC in what Phil has just commented?
Thanks, Cecilia. Good morning, everybody. Well, I'll just take a quick step back and think about why PwC is operating in this space at all. So PwC's purpose as a business is to build trust in society and solve important problems. And we believe that our team's best able to achieve both of these objectives by helping to add trust and transparency to the world of marketing and media. And our marketing and media team is uniquely positioned to support the industry as well. So we've got a team of 60 plus staff in the UK with a traditional audit skill set developed at PwC. And this is combined with others that have been brought into the team with deep media and technology expertise that have been acquired from industry, including marketers, agency bodies and ad tech specialists. And then we ameliorate that with 300 skilled professionals who sit all over the world to support us in our global endeavors as well. Our primary focus as a team has been working historically with media owners, agencies and advertisers, things like verifying audience data, testing how media owners deliver and report on advertising campaigns, or assessing whether agencies are getting the right price and quality for their marketing. However, we're seeing more and more advertising technology businesses seek to demonstrate to their key stakeholders that they're delivering on their promises. And that's how PwC started off by working with Adform on the back of the ISBA study, which I might mention in more detail later. And was the start of the relationship between us and Adform that led to us looking at the Adform ID fusion technology.
Thank you. Yeah, and Adam, if you could go into a little bit more detail on what did PwC test for Adform in this specific project?
of course. So the focus was on Adform ID Fusion, and we looked to perform a number of different tests. Some performed in the live environment, looking at data from May 2022, where we ran a brand campaign looking at 10 major publishers focused on the Norwegian market. And then we also did some digging into historical data, data from February to April 2022, in order to assess a few key specific areas, which I'll just touch on very briefly now. So the primary tests were as follows. So the first one we were looking at was incremental reach through the use of first-party IDs and ID Fusion. Secondly, we were looking at the marketing efficiency and performance through Adform's ID Fusion. Then, with respect to the performance, we were looking at historical performance improvement across environments that support first-party IDs. So we looked at, as our indicative measure of performance, at click-through rates. I acknowledge that click-through rates not necessarily the best proxy for performance, but nonetheless, it was an important test for us in this instance. And then finally, we reviewed a case study conducted by Adform to assert whether or not it was appropriate for use and had the right assumptions built in to give the confidence in its use as a case study.
And yes, and I've seen the report, by the way. We can download it in our website. We will be distributing afterwards to everybody listening and registered. But it's a very, very long report, deep and detailed. So maybe, Phil, you can do a short summary and highlight results for the audience today.
Yeah, sure. It is very detailed, but you're right, Cecilia. The first 3 pages are pretty easy to read and digest. And I think, Adam explained really well about the use cases and the level of information they go in. You can see some ideas in that detail about how to run a campaign yourselves, or of course, work with someone like our team to be able to do that. So the results were, as Adam said, we were looking at both branding and performance. We wanted to make sure that this was something that could be validated across the kind of the whole funnel, if you like. And yes, some of those metrics weren't ultimately the right down at the bottom performance elements, but using things like CTRs and CPCs is certainly a good place to start. For A/B testing for performance, we saw a massive improvement on click-through rates, 161%. We saw a reduction in CPCs by 65%. And also by using first-party IDs, we also were able to help better with frequency capping. So we went from nearly 5 impressions per user to just over 3. From a branding perspective, we also saw some great results, and we saw a huge increase in the number of addressable impressions from, I think, 22,000 to 175,000 in the in the test data, which is a massive increase. And of course, is really down to the fact that actually by using these first-party IDs, we are able to see audiences and activity in Safari and Firefox, and therefore be able to act on them and bid on them and so on.
These results, we were all very impressed with them. And I don't know if, Adam, you would like to add any detail on them?
Yeah, very happily. And yeah, just as my role as the independent verifier, I get to bore you with a few additional numbers in relation to this. But so that last point around the number of addressable impressions, they increased by 669% from that 22,847 up to 175,662 unique impressions as part of the A/B test, which Phil has mentioned. And just to touch on some of the specifics, movements in relation to the other tests that Phil highlighted. So that 161% improvement in CTR was an increase from 0.18% to 0.47%, which is clearly statistically significant, as was the reduction in the cost per click, which came down 65% from 1.78 euros to 1.08 euros. Although please remember that this was all done originally in Norwegian kroner and was converted at the time of the report into euros to make it easier to understand. The final part I would just add is when we were looking at the frequency capping, we saw a drop of 29%. So it was 4.8 down to 3.4 impressions per user, when the target for the campaigning was 2. So a significant, again, improvement of 29%.
Adam, is this something you're seeing other players in the market do more and more? Have their results tested in the, in the shake of transparency?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned at the start, media owners, agencies, and advertisers are looking for more and more confidence in their partners in this process to make sure they're doing the right thing. And the world is getting ever more complicated. So I think the technology is getting more complicated, the volume and the complexity of the data is getting more significant. So we're getting more and more requests to provide support, both at a client level and an industry level. And a lot of this is originated from the industry support we provided to ISBA when we did the work around the programmatic supply chain study, looking at financial transparency. For those that aren't familiar with that study, it involved many major advertisers, agencies, and media owners. We matched impressions from the SSPs through to the DSPs and identified a number of really interesting findings back in 2019, I think it came out. Firstly, it was half of the advertising spend was reaching the media owners. Secondly, there was a 15% of the spend that couldn't be attributed to any particular party. We refer to it as the unknown delta. And this spoke to the lack of transparency across the ecosystem for the industry as a whole. And then we also noted that there was a significant spend on third-party data as well, an issue that, again, will need to be addressed by the market as third-party cookies are deprecated in Chrome. So a number of interesting points identified by the study. And as a slight teaser, we are currently working in the UK on an update to that study. We believe there's been significant progress on a number of those areas, and we're currently reperforming the work to a degree to determine how much progress has actually been made. And then, Cecilia, to answer your question, are we doing more and more work at a client level, and do we believe that will continue? Yes, absolutely. We've seen more and more ad tech vendors looking for independent third parties like ourselves to demonstrate that technology does indeed do what it's promised to their stakeholders. This is partly being driven by some of the more mature ad tech businesses who are looking to use it as a differentiator. But we are also seeing more increased scrutiny from the bigger players in the media ecosystem who are concerned about the way in which their data is being used by other parties as well. So I'd say there are probably 4 major areas that we're expecting to get more and more involved with: total audience and audience segment accuracy, something that we do a lot of work with already. Making sure that there's appropriate permissioning and use of that data. Data privacy and security, which are overarching major themes. And then old themes that seem to have got a bit quiet, but still relevant. So things like ad fraud, viewability, and brand safety.
I'm happy to hear that, Adam, because when we started when you did the ISBA report and we kicked it off with Adfrom Flow, that report we commissioned from you, we really see it's the way to go in the market with the different players to prove that we can be trusted and that all the information is transparent for the clients using it. And looking forward to hearing to seeing and reviewing that second ISBA report, definitely. And Phil, I wanted to go back a little bit on the identity, and you are running the UK business for Adform. I would love to hear from you. What do you think is the status of first-party data currently?
Yeah, I think I can talk a bit about the UK and all of Europe as well, because obviously we share data between the country managers and the markets. I think I think there's an element of first-party IDs and stuff, but there's also the first-party data, as you've asked, right? So from an ID perspective, we're in a really good place. We can always do more, but we're in a good place. All the major European markets, we see traction with over 90% of top publishers. It's the same in the UK, so I think it's about 95%. So we monitor the top publishers that we work with in terms of volume of traffic, and we see how many of them are sending us first-party IDs. So that's great. And as I said before, publishers are good and on board with IDs. Advertisers with IDs are catching up, and we can now get them to also share their IDs. Data's a little behind in terms of the industry, but I think we are seeing traction. I think we know that, Adam said some of the major players, right? The large brands, the large publishers know the value of first-party data and want to be able to untap the power of their own data, or if they don't have it, like a CPG, for example, they may want to, CPG, where people don't perhaps go to their website to buy things, they might not have a huge amount of first-party data, whether it's analytics or CRM. So again, they want to tap into the publisher data. They want to understand audiences that go to particular pages of publisher consortiums and see if they can sort of, tie into that and buy against that. We see a lot of first-party DMPs, which are pretty much implemented by most publishers, so that they can really maximize their own yield. But we want to make it more accessible in our platform, not just through a deal ID, but also through our audience marketplace, and we're working through that. In terms of working with advertisers' first-party data, we're seeing a rise of customer data platforms in the market, otherwise known as CDPs. And a lot of people think this is the answer, and it is to an extent, but to use the customer data that's available in a CDP, because that's consented kind of one-to-one data, you have to anonymize it. If you want to use it from an advertising perspective, it has to be aggregated and bundled into a sort of an audience. And this is why data clean rooms are so important, such as LiveRamp, because they are that circuit breaker between the known user and the unknown user, between the CDP and the activation by a DMP or a DSP. And so, we're seeing more and more conversations with customers where they're asking us how our platform integrates with a CDP, or how it integrates with a clean room as well. But I think again, the publishers have taken the lead in terms of first-party data. Advertisers are trying to catch up, but they need to put a bit of infrastructure in to be able to do that. But that's something that we're having conversations with every day.
Sorry, Cecilia, just to add to that very briefly. So in my role of working largely with a lot of media owners, I would say that they recognize that there is an opportunity for them in this space to make sure that they act as one of the key enablers in this process of allowing more effective targeted advertising through the information that they have, but they've also recognized that they need to do it in a way that's appropriate and permissioned, and are acutely aware that there is an opportunity. That said, there is still a lot of work being done by some of the publishers to make sure that they have good quality first-party data themselves to be able to operate effectively in a world where those third-party cookies have fully gone. So there is still work to do on the publisher side as well to improve the quality of that first-party data, ensure it's appropriately permissioned as well, before making the most of this advantage once the third-party cookies are fully deprecated.
I think what it's clear is everybody needs to take action and start testing and seeing that they're ready for this to happen. And I think you touched upon this earlier a bit, Adam, but just if you have any further thoughts, what role can PwC play for the future transparently?
Yeah, so I feel like I probably answered much of this earlier, but I would probably say that it's going to be at those two levels that I flagged earlier. So supporting the wider industry and understanding and the changing dynamics of the problems that are facing the sector, because as I said, it's going to get more and more complex with increasingly complex technologies and data. And we're seeing the regulatory environment also change as well, and making sure everybody is on top of that is going to be also very, very important. And I think the industry as a whole is maturing, and as such, will need increased support from third parties to navigate this complex landscape. And that's fortunately one of the areas we feel we will be best able to support. And then understanding the key issues at industry level will translate into supporting individual businesses in navigating that complex environment at an individual client level.
And Phil, a little bit more of a broader question, but what other challenges do you think there's going to be for marketers out there moving into 2023, besides the ones we have discussed?
It's an interesting time to be alive, never mind an interesting time to be a marketer, I think. But, you know, there's been so many positives from 2022 because, of course, you know, we've come out of 2 years of lockdown, but obviously there's also been some incredible headwinds that we have to deal with. There's the war in the Ukraine. There's the rising cost of living and inflation, not just in the UK, but also, you know, throughout Europe and all the major markets globally. We had a very short-term challenge in the UK in September with the death of the Queen, which made a huge impact on ad budgets as brands felt compelled to be respectful and pull back ad spend online, which is obviously kind of then pushes into, as we get into Q4, what impact that will have. We've also, you know, seen the rise, and rightly so, of social issues becoming front and center. Diversity and inclusion is still a key interest to people, not just hiring people, but also actually when it comes to pitches, but also carbon neutrality and the environment. I'm seeing more and more RFPs land on my desk or my team's desk where they're perhaps 2 of the 4 to 5 main pillars of the proposal, and this is for a tech company. So not just interested in your tech, but you know, what is your stance on these things? We have attention metrics. We have how advertisers are going to try and go beyond softer metrics, such as viewability, to more tangible business benefits. We have retail media. You know, there's plenty of companies out there that have absolutely nailed this already in terms of their business strategy, but others scratching their heads to see if they should be looking at it, how they can capitalize on it, what work is required, and so on. And then, of course, we have the rise always of new and emerging channels. We saw, you know, CTV, that's perhaps been bubbling away in Europe for a while, is starting to get traction, I feel like, this year. Digital at home is back after a sluggish kind of lockdown period, as you would expect. So, yeah, I mean, there's a ton of challenges, but there's also, you know, where there are challenges, there are opportunities. So it's an exciting time, as always, to work in our industry.
Thanks, Phil. And Adam, anything to add there?
The only thing I would add on top of that is that I think one of the most crucial aspects of the next couple of years will be a focus on data governance, not just compliance, but making sure that companies are suitably across the accuracy and permissioning of the data. So crucially, it's going to be very important to be completely comfortable with the data ingestion, the underlying processing of the data, and making sure that's being done in the right way, and then data deletion as well. So data governance as a whole, I think, is going to be a really hot topic over the next 2 years.
Completely agree. And we're starting to get questions now. So if you like, let me read you the first one. There is definitely an opportunity for many in the digital ecosystem. However, for advertisers, there is certainly more confusion, increased tech costs, data clean rooms, CPDs, and more challenges in effective measurement cross-platform and environment. All this while they are already trying to establish direct relationships with the main publishers. How do you think advertisers should look into measuring their investments in media, and how will this bring more transparency to the programmatic supply chain? Who wants to take this one?
I'm happy to, and then I'll see if Adam will validate my response. Yeah, great question out of the box. I think that this, again, maybe perhaps goes back to the ISBA study. And as I said at the start, it's funny that it's 3 years old. It still feels extremely relevant. So also looking forward to the updated one. As an industry, we always try and confuse the hell out of people by having these Lumascapes of additional products. And you're right, CDPs are now in there in the tech tax. Clean rooms can be there in the tech tax, but I think it comes back to finding a partner or partners that you trust and trying to minimize the amount of partners that you have. So you see multi-DSP strategies, multi-SSP strategies, and then different vendors all doing different things. Try and find a partner that can do as many of those things as possible so that you have one partner paying one sort of fee towards, but also from a technology perspective, it's one set of pipes that go from the advertiser to the publisher. And I think if you have that, you're going to have more transparency. You're going to be able to kind of know who your partner is and make sure that they're beholden to what you're trying to do in terms of transparency, data ownership, and so on. And just in terms of measurement as well, I think it will make it easier when you've got one source of truth as opposed to multiple sources of truth.
Yeah, I agree to a significant extent with Phil there. I think for some, simplicity in terms of your marketing plan may be challenging, but I would say that it is really important for you to understand who your key partners are and who their partners are as well. Mapping out the routes from advertiser all the way through to media owner to the extent that you can, so that you've got clarity around how that data is being used. And to some extent, you should then be able to rely on key trusted partners to keep that route as simple as possible, to enable you to manage and monitor it as effectively as you can. Because ultimately, complexity for complexity's sake is adding no value to anybody. So understanding how that data is being used and working with trusted partners through that process and pushing your partners to provide you with that information, that clarity around what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're comfortable that the risks are addressed, I think is going to help open up the environment to and force players that perhaps maybe aren't being as honest or open or transparent about how things are operating to strive for change or become more transparent in order to provide advertisers with that comfort.
I cannot, being a marketer, I cannot agree more with you both. There's another very interesting question here that we got. Are there any cultural differences regarding transparency across Europe? If the Nordics were ahead of the curve, as you mentioned, regarding users deciding not to use cookies, are there any other trends that are developing in that region that could spread across Europe? Will adoption of this technology help stave off regulation?
Adam, do you want to go first this time?
Well, I was going to say, I might need your expertise with regard to the Nordics specifically, but I might be able to then add a little bit on top of that.
So there are cultural differences, not just in transparency across Europe. Having worked in the industry for a long time, I worked for big US tech companies, and then they see that Europe is not one country; it's lots and lots of different countries. As we know, there are cultural differences in everything. So it was more for them in terms of being ahead of the curve regarding users deciding not to use cookies. I'm not sure if it was that it was a conscious decision by people in those Nordic markets to flip, or if it was just that they had traditionally always used Safari, for instance. So we know that the iPhone penetration is bigger in those markets, and then because Safari had made those changes themselves, that naturally happened. But we do for instance, we know Firefox has a larger market share in Germany, which is another key market for ours. And we know that Germans in particular, you know, were some of the leaders in some of the privacy regulations, and one of the reasons we are so privacy first and centric, because it was Germany that was a key market for us, and brands that we were working with expected it, you know, everything from local data centers to how, I guess, how we look at legitimate interest and all of the kind of things in between. So in terms of trends that are spreading across Europe, I can't think of any in particular, but I do know that if we look at Chrome as a whole, we're also seeing a rise of people already using blockers to block the third-party cookies. So we very much go and say, we are past the tipping point now. We think there are more people using browsers without cookies in Europe than there are that are. And that's why the first party approach is really important. And it's important that users of the internet feel that we're doing something that's trustworthy, and hopefully using first party as opposed to tagging a site with lots of third party and doing something with their data is more transparent. But ultimately, it's about trying to deliver appropriate advertising to people based on, you know, their likes and interests, and not hitting them with ads at the wrong time and so on. So you know, the open internet is free for a reason, and it's free because it has advertising, and we have to continue to use advertising to fund it. So why not make sure that those ads are relevant and messaging people at the right moment, rather than trying to hit them with things because that are completely irrelevant because we have no data or information on them. So I think the biggest trend on that is knowing that we're now past the point of no return with cookies, and people absolutely have to be looking to get their house in order with regards to an alternative solution.
Yeah, I think I would add from my personal experience, I'd probably have two key comments to make. One, in terms of interest from Europe or changes that are on the transparency front around, we're noticing an increase in demand for our services around verification coming from Europe, which perhaps historically we haven't seen very much of. So that broader demand for independent verification of audience data, audience segments, processes and controls that underpin the way that the data is being used and reported is certainly on the up, which is very helpful for us. The other thing I would say is that, as we noted actually in Cannes, through very lively and exciting debate around the future with our US colleagues and various US advertisers and marketers, the view on what's going to work and be the right solutions to support the growth of the industry, as well as increasing transparency across the sector, is potentially going to diverge a little bit between the US and Europe, driven by, I suspect, almost exclusively, certainly in part by GDPR. And I think we're noticing that there definitely will be significant differences, we think, in the solutions that are presented in the two markets, which presents an interesting challenge for companies that operate in both spaces.
Here's a question for Phil. How is Adform's solution working compared to existing solutions in market?
I guess from the sort of the more obvious ones that I know about, they tend to be some tech vendors that also have their own ID. I don't want to name names, but you know, quite famous ones in the industry. And as I said at the start, we very much decided not to go down that route of, again, making a very convoluted ID landscape even more convoluted by having another ID. What we wanted to do was ensure that we were agnostic so that we could work with anything. I mean, there's many publishers that send us recognized IDs in the industry, like ID5. There's others that send their own ID because they developed a consortium. And there's some that send us 3 or 4 different IDs. So it's important that we're able to work with all of them. And work with the ones that have the largest scale. So again, going back to cultural differences in Europe, what we see that has great market share in France may not have great market share in Germany, etc., etc. So important to have a real mix. From a publisher perspective, if you're on the call and you work for a publisher, you'll totally understand that. If you're an advertiser, you may be thinking, I haven't picked an ID vendor, I'm not sure whether I need to. And so again, it's important that we say not necessarily, right? We can work with the ID vendors that come from the publishers. We can work with you on a first party data strategy. But I think it's that agnosticity that we try and approach it, both first-party IDs and first-party data, from saying, let's sit down and work out your use cases. Let's look at the key markets you're in, and then let's come back with a suggestion as how best to approach this.
And I've got a last question that I'm going to ask to Adam before we hand it back to Lauren. Adam, who is best positioned to benefit from deprecation of third-party cookies, do you think?
Thanks, Cecilia. I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but the premium publishers and particularly the ones with strong contextual environments and accurate, permissioned, and verified first-party data are going to be the ones that benefit the most. And I think at the moment, most of them are aware of that, but some of them acknowledge that they're going to need to build on the quality of that data to make the most of it. I would also add, and I think there was a follow-up question as well on whether or not there'd be some form of industry standards associated with first-party IDs. I think I just don't think, and this is my personal view, that we'll ever see a panacea with regard to identity tech, because the publishers will want to retain the value associated with the IDs. So while I think it could make things more efficient, certainly I think it's going to be a very difficult sell. And I certainly don't think we'll see anything in the short term around first-party IDs being standardized with industry standards just yet. So just wanted to make sure I picked that up as well. I saw that question come through at the very end.
The only thing I would add to that on Adam is, the IAB gold standard, right? We're on IAB call here, and the IAB gold standard talks about reducing ad fraud. It talks about brand safety. It talks about improving user experience, and it talks about being compliant. And I think this approach is all of those things. It might not be tied into any kind of IAB standard or anything else, but it's certainly tied into sort of the GDPR compliance and TCF as well. And again, that's one of the reasons that we think it's such a great way of doing it, because we're all about trying to ensure that there's a better user experience for the consumer. And I think that in that regard, it ticks the boxes with IAB gold standard.
Great, thanks so much both, and for your time and for the chat and for replying to all the questions. It was really interesting. And thanks IAB again for having us today here. And back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you, Phil, Adam, for running us all through that great conversation today. Thank you as well for everyone that's joined us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us on this webinar. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have recorded the session, so we'll make sure we share a copy of that out with you all in the next couple of days. But again, thank you for joining, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.